And that's kind of the other part of what I want to talk about, because it seems to me that the promotion of an increase in Islamophobia is not intended simply to attack Muslims. It's intended to obfuscate what the real contradictions in our society are. It's intended to misdirect people's anger against a false enemy and to misdirect it from the real enemy. That's not new. And it's not even unique today to Muslims. If you look at Arizona and you look at the anti-immigrant activity there, the attacks from Sheriff Joe Arpaio on Mexicans even prior to the passage of the law in Arizona and ordering every law enforcement officer to investigate anybody who may be deemed as so-called illegal immigrant. The attacks on Mexicans are of a piece with the attacks on Muslims. And in the past, others who are one way or another able to be distinguished have been subject to those kinds of attacks, starting with the genocide against Native peoples, with the enslavement of African peoples, and even for Jim Crow for a century after the Civil War. You know, we all know that until 1954, when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, separate but equal was the law of the land. The 14th Amendment, giving equal protection, has been enforced by the Supreme Court over the years more in favor of corporations than it has to liberate African Americans from the vestiges and heritage of 3 centuries of chattel slavery. It was not until 68 that restrictive covenants were deemed to be unlawful, which is to say, if you have a deed that says you can't transfer your property to a black person, a Jewish person, a Hindu, all of that was actually legal. Now, for a while, I think after 1948, it couldn't be enforced by courts, but there was nothing unlawful about it. So if you chose to act on that, you were free to do that. All of this, I would suggest, is purposefully done to obfuscate what the real contradiction is in this society, the one that Republicans particularly keep criticizing, even if it's hinted at, although no, you're talking about class warfare, right? And as if any Democrat actually talks about class warfare. But when we look at a society which so much wealth is concentrated in so few hands, and that disparity is becoming greater daily, it is the greatest now that it has been since the Great Depression. And, of course, we now have a package that is allowing the rich to keep their tax cuts.
And Obama approved it.
Yeah, and Obama cut that deal. There is, in fact, a class war going on in this country. And unfortunately, the only class that is fighting it is the one with the money. and indeed, I think the Tea Party phenomenon, I think I'll getting to the close with this, the Tea Party phenomenon, I would suggest, is a reflection of just how effective this obfuscation has been. The Tea Party says, we're not racist, which is, on one level, probably, not the, only a small number of them are avowedly racist. But, of course, now when the Supreme Court talks about the way to stop discriminating based on race is to stop discriminating based on race, it is remarkable how those policies to allegedly eliminate racism simply maintain the historic subjugation of African peoples. The analogy I always use is if you have a few people on the Tour de France who are required to ride unicycles for the first 4 stages of the tour, and then you say, okay, now you can ride bicycles, but we're not going to give you anything to catch up. Now you're all equal. The inevitable result is that the guys that were riding the bicycles to begin with are going to stay ahead. So we have, and I'm getting back to the Tea Party. I knew I had something to say. The phenomenon I suggest to the Tea Party is there are people now who have some education, who have done fairly well for themselves in the past, own small businesses that have been reasonably successful, and are now worried about the fact that they're not making any money because the economy is such a shambles. And they see themselves as aspiring to get rich and fearful of getting poor. But they unite with those above them who are getting richer, rather than those who are in the same boat they are and becoming more and more impoverished. And the way that is maintained in this country, and has been historically, and not just in this country, but virtually everywhere, the way that is maintained is by identifying others as the enemy, whether openly or through subterfuge and the kinds of examples that I discussed that contradict what our presidents, their presidents, say. And that is why I think we have to combat not just Islamophobia as a particular discrete phenomenon, kind of distinct from everything else. The way we combat it and the way we change it is by placing it in the context of the overall attack by the rich on the rest of us.